While the Sims here are just, kind of being boring, who wants to hear the history of Moonwood Mill? Because thanks to the Sims community, we now have an unabridged history of Moonwood Mill, so that you don't have to go and research things and look at shards, and you don't have to go digging. So we've got it all in one place. So Moonwood Mill has a lot of lore, not just about Moonwood Mill itself, but also about the Sims 4 or Sims worlds in general, specifically about spellcasters and vampires, and of course werewolves, because they're all connected. Piercing all of the lore that you can find here in Moonwood Mill is not easy, because you've got to read books multiple times. You have to dig around to find pot shards and other relics. You have to ask around town, and yeah, it can be really difficult to get all this lore together. But thanks to the Sims community website, they have got it all together, and they've put it into one article. So this is what I'm going to read real quick to you all. Ancient times. Long ago, Moonwood Mill used to be an ancient Mesopotamian city. The Mesopotamians believed that the greatest minds of their society were reborn as wolves that howled to store their wisdom in the moon. As the moon moved through its waxing phases, the growing light each night represented the moon being filled with the wisdom of their wolf ancestors. On the night of the full moon, when the moon had become full with this wisdom, the Mesopotamians wore wolf masks and ceremoniously drew upon all of the moon's stored wisdom. So, as the moon waned afterward, the fading light represented the moon's wisdom being dispersed amongst the people. The Mesopotamians were also known for their ability to tame cow plants. They used their cow plant allies as stationary sentinels of defense to protect their people from threats. They also experimented with crossbreeding them to be mobile attack units. However, crossbreeding mobile cow plants was a very difficult venture, and they had limited success with this. It is believed that the first werewolves who would come later looked to the ancient Mesopotamians as their inspiration for harnessing the moon's power, which leads us to the original moon casters. In later times, a group of spellcasters sought to use the moon's powers as a means of enhancing their own magic. They took on wolf familiars and used the moon's energy to draw upon their wolves' nature and characteristics. These spellcasters became the first mooncasters. Gregorius Lundvik, Avelina Lundvik, Maria Volkov, and Yinakia were the first mooncasters. The four original mooncasters performed a highly unstable spell from the Untamed School of Magic atop Moonwood Mill's Howling Point Cliff to imbue themselves with the qualities of their wolf familiars. The spell was more powerful than they had anticipated, and caused an overload which transformed them into the first werewolves. This overload also created the Moonpetal Flower and infused Lake Lundvik with lunar energy, and which in turn created the Luna Fish. Later, the Moonpetal and the Lunar Waters would play a large role in the Mooncasters' ceremonies. The newly born werewolves embraced their new existence, but each had a different view about what it truly means to be a werewolf. Gregorius is Greg in this world. Gregorius's wolf familiar was named Brutus. Brutus was a fearsome alpha wolf, and through him, Gregorius, or Greg, adopted the beastly strength of his familiar. Avelina Lundvik was his wife, and they were very close friends with their fellow mooncaster, Yinakia. However, Gregorius and Maria Volkov were often embroiled in intense disagreements with each other. Avelina's wolf familiar was named Gibby. Gibby had a special connection with the moon, which enhanced Avelina's fascination with the night sky. She dedicated much of her life to studying the moon and the cosmos. She was convinced that her research would aid her husband's efforts to experiment with his fury. Maria's wolf familiar was named Verity. Verity had a distinguished princely nature, which enhanced Maria's dedication to enrichment and diplomacy. She was often at odds with Gregorius and felt like Gregorius was just jealous of her ability to control her fury. Maria's husband is named John, and their son is Christopher Volkov, who is currently the Moonwood Collective's alpha. But not for long. Maria is also the author of A History of Moonwood Mill, one of the books that can be found at the Moonwood Mill Library. Yinakia's wolf familiar was named Ringa. Ringa had a love of adventure and passed his wanderlust into Yina. Yina was married to a non-werewolf named Emmy, who disliked her wife's thrill-seeking nature and just wanted to settle down. Yina's thirst for action led to her demise when she was killed by a cow plant of the Moo casters, not to be confused with moon casters. Her best friend Gregorius was deeply affected by her death, and Ringa remained glued to Emmy's side until his dying days. Loads of lore, and this is super interesting stuff as well. So let's move on to Operation Eternal Flame. One might say that the spellcasters' own hubris proved to be their downfall because they are responsible not just for the creation of the first werewolves, but also the first vampires. Ultimately, their mistakes led to the destruction of their own realm and a centuries-long war that almost wiped them out of existence. The spellcasters were experimenting with creating duplicates of themselves, but they became frustrated that these duplicates needed food to survive. To try and maximize the efficiency of these duplicates, they fed them potions, and in doing so, created monsters. The potions turned the duplicated spellcasters into permanent mutations, who turned on their creators, feasting upon them. The magical blood of the spellcasters they consumed enhanced their strength and thus became the first vampires. This event was the catalyst that started a grisly war between spellcasters and vampires. In an effort to eradicate all the spellcasters, the vampires launched Operation Eternal Flame, a covert mission to turn every spellcaster into vampires. In response to Operation Eternal Flame, the spellcasters divided into two groups, Mooncasters and Moocasters. Both drew inspiration from the ancient Mesopotamians, and both were united in their efforts to thwart Operation Eternal Flame, but their methods differed. While the Mooncasters focused on drawing down the power of the moon to amplify their powers, the Moocasters revived the Mesopotamian practice of taming and crossbreeding cow plants to use as weapons against the vampires. Unlike their ancient ancestors, the Moocasters had great success with crossbreeding their cow plants. At first, the Mooncasters and Moocasters enjoyed a prosperous alliance, working together to fight against the vampires. The alliance fell apart when one of the original Mooncasters, EACN, was killed by one of the Moocasters' cow plants during a joint defense mission. With the spellcasters now at odds with each other, the vampires gained the upper hand in the war and pushed the spellcasters to the brink of extinction. Near the end of Operation Eternal Flame, the last remaining spellcasters attempted to harness unstable magic once again in desperation to save their kind. They derived a spell from the Untamed School that could cure every vampire in the world. One spell that could reach across the globe and turn every vampire human, wiping them out forever. The spell was too powerful and backfired on them, causing a massive overload that ripped the magic realm apart. To this day, the magic realm is still in fragmented pieces from this disastrous spell gone awry. So that is some awesome lore about the spellcasters and vampires and how vampires came about, which is, like I said, pretty cool. Pretty cool. So let's fast forward to modern Moonwood Mill. As time passed and the Mooncasters had children, it became apparent that unlike other magical beings, lycanthropy was not guaranteed to be passed down through the generations. Some of the Mooncasters' children were both with dormant wolf genes. These children sought out a way to awaken those dormant genes. They discovered that swimming in Lake Lundvik under a full moon would awaken the dormant wolf and complete their transformation. Many years later, closer to modern times, refugees fleeing from conflict came to settle in Moonwood Mill, although they simply called the area the Moonwood when they arrived. They gave it this name because they believed the densely forested area was imbued with lunar energy. The foundling settlers in the Moonwood built the town's sawmill and factories. The mill and the factories allowed the town to flourish, and people flocked there for both employment opportunities and a more rugged life close to nature. Over time, the mill became embedded in the identity of the town, and the Moonwood began to be called Moonwood Mill. During the height of the Moonwood Mill's productivity, the mill's founders established the Moonwood Collective, an organization that encouraged its members to strive towards self-sustainability, diplomatic communication, and communal contribution. The Diary of Gregorius Lundvik mentions something called the Century Conflict. Following this conflict, the remaining werewolves scattered around the world. Okay, so there's a Century Conflict, and after this Century Conflict, all of the werewolves just scattered. But Christopher Volkov chose to stay. So that is pretty much it right now about the lore in Moonwood Mill that ties werewolves and vampires and spellcasters all together. Now what I want to know is at a future time, because we do not have any Moo casters in the game. Since they've now been mentioned in lore, will we get Moo casters in The Sims 4 in a future update? Because I think that would be so cool. I honestly think that would be absolutely awesome if we did. Because I would love for the cow plants to have more meaning than just killing Sims. I would like to be able to like do more things with the cow plants, because that would be awesome.